So I was sent The King in Yellow. I know that probably sounds like a bit or a setup for a bit or something like that, but it really happened. I was sent a two-act play called The King in Yellow. The first act is fairly normal. It's what you'd expect of a stage play, in the 2020s. And then at the beginning of the second act, there is a really marked shift that occurs. I've got the play right here. It's The King in Yellow. Hopefully you can see that. I actually received it in December of 2025. It was about a week before Christmas. It was attached to an email that was it was very spare in its text. It said like, "Hey, I saw your coverage of the Repair of Reputations." I think that was the only video I had put out at the time. God knows why anybody thought that one was good. But somebody did, I guess, and they were like, "Yeah, so I enjoyed that, and here is The King in Yellow. I wrote it." So yeah, I did what everybody does when they get The King in Yellow, and I read it. So let's talk about it. Now, in case you're new to The King in Yellow, let me get you caught up. The King in Yellow, the original, is a short story collection first published by New York artist Robert W. Chambers in 1895. The first five-ish stories in the collection concern a two-act play, also called The King in Yellow, that results in madness and death for anyone who reads it. Elements of what is now called the Yellow mythos went on to be incorporated into H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos and eventually countless other canons, fandoms, and franchises as well. Famously, the first season of True Detective is actually based on The King in Yellow, but there are also a ton of TTRPGs based on The King in Yellow. There's a tarot deck, a Yu-Gi-Oh card, and even elements of Elden Ring's lore are drawn directly from the Yellow mythos. Though The King in Yellow is associated with various nerd cultures today, the author's goals for the collection were actually something really, really different from that. Chambers, who was an ardent Catholic and a romantic in the sense of the artistic movement, wrote the collection to navigate the tension between his romantic desire for a passionate, cosmically ordained true love and the then more popular conception of decadent love, which, while certainly also passionate, was more casual and more hedonistic and ultimately in conflict with that Catholicism that I just mentioned. In the stories by Chambers, the King in Yellow is bound in yellow because it was, at the time, the color of decadence, which Chambers equates with the color of sin. Characters who give in to their earthly desires and read the King in Yellow are punished with maddening visions of Carcosa, a sort of empty anti-heaven ruled by the titular Yellow King. To sum up, Chambers was a man who felt he was supposed to desire one thing, but at times found himself desiring something else. Reading The King in Yellow leaves one with the impression that Chambers resented his own inability to control what it was he desired. And if you've watched my video on The Prophet's Paradise, which is one of the most crucial stories in The King in Yellow, you'll know that he feared being doomed to have neither what he wanted nor what he wanted to want. He feared dying and ending up in Christian heaven without ever having really lived on Earth. To some people, this might all sound sort of abstract, sort of high-minded, and I do sympathize with that reaction because, yeah, it sort of is that. It's a struggling man's earnest response to the artistic movements of his time, to his own religious mores, his faith beliefs, and to his own sense of right and wrong, which probably, overlaps with his religious beliefs, but it seems like maybe also is in tension with them at times. And when those kinds of major forces, both individual and social, collide, the result is going to be something that is just more complicated than like, let's all scream as we run away from the scary yellow man. And some of you are probably thinking, Jay, you're conflating Chambers, the man, with the beliefs that are espoused by The King in Yellow, the short story collection, as a text. And yes, I am. I'm just going to do that. I'm going to say that the art is the artist. I think that's just true in this case. I think that the Chambers that we get in The King in Yellow is an accurate reflection of Chambers as he existed in his 20s when he lived in Paris. I think that the things that come up in The King in Yellow thematically, rhetorically, have too much overlap with Chambers' biography as we understand it. Of course, more information could come out about him in the coming years that refutes this idea, and I would accept that. But, knowing what we know about his biography and knowing what we know about what is in The King in Yellow, I do think that this is sort of him dealing with stuff that was actually happening in his real life. If you don't like that interpretation, that's fine. You're welcome to disagree, but that is my interpretation. But I will say that much of this like historical context and even some of this literary context, as it relates to The King in Yellow, about romanticism, about decadence, is not yet widely known. It's becoming more commonly known thanks to the work of YouTubers like Professor Bowers over at phd&d, and there's a particular Redditor who, I don't know if he would want to be named, but he's doing some really good work to actually put together like a biography of Chambers, and I hope that that will come out, because I would love to read it. So all that to say, like, a lot of what I'm saying is it's not new information, but it's new to the public. So I would never, ever, ever expect that an interpretation of The King in Yellow would contend with the dueling philosophies of romanticism and decadence. That just wouldn't be fair. It also wouldn't be fair to expect that like every writer who likes The King in Yellow is interested in those specific things. However, what I would expect from any story that adapts elements of Chambers' work is that it has something to say about the real world. It has something to say about real things that are really happening and affect real people. Whether those things are more individual and small, like one person's relationship to romantic love or a country's relationship to fascism, I would expect that additions to the Yellow mythos have something of consequence to contribute to like the larger literary conversation happening in the world. And yet, what I found as I've read modern additions to the Yellow mythos, across anthologies, across archived web pages, across out-of-print editions of literary journals, is that way too often The King in Yellow gets reduced to this generic, scary guy who looms sort of just outside of the draw distance of reality, and is just kind of there, and is frankly not meaningfully distinct from like fucking Slender Man. And I think that that's extremely, extremely lame. Thankfully, though, there are exceptions. We've talked about a few. I would say that the tarot deck, although not a story in and of itself, the tarot deck that Arc Dream put together contains, in its little pamphlet, a narrative, quote unquote, that does contribute to the Yellow mythos. I would say that Field Trip by Patrick Freiwald is a King in Yellow story that has something to say. And I would add this play, The King in Yellow by Jay Scala, to that pantheon of King in Yellow works that are engaged with the real world, that care about people and what happens to them, and is trying to entertain. Yes, this play is definitely trying to entertain, and it succeeds in that, but it's also trying to give us something to think about. And I think its hope is that those thoughts will then manifest as positive actions and positive change in the world. And I can't think of a more worthy aim for literature writ large than that. So with all that in mind, I'm overjoyed, I'm excited to share with you in great detail a summary of Jay Scala's The King in Yellow, followed by, our usual English Club analysis, critiques, feedback, all that stuff. Let's do it. The King in Yellow by Jay Scala is a 2-act play with a small cast of characters. They include Hastur, aka the King in Yellow, who is played by a small ensemble that I assume moves around in unison except for when they split up to play background characters, our protagonist Morgan, their co-worker and friend Alex, Cass, an occultist and dramaturge, and Cam, who is both Alex's dead sibling and Cass's dead child, though these aren't the same Cam, at least not at the same time. There's kind of a multiverse thing going on, which we'll get into later. While the first act of the play is set in the modern day, the second act, which is a play within the play, is set in Carcosa, and all of the major characters play themselves, playing other roles. So you might have noticed that I didn't gender any of the main cast, and that's for a very specific reason, because at the end of the Dramatis Personae, Jay Scala has written for us, a note on casting. I encourage directors to practice gender anarchy in regard to casting. The audience may wonder, is this character supposed to be a boy or a girl? They are not supposed to be either. Let them wonder. Diversity of all kinds in casting is highly encouraged. So yeah, everybody in The King in Yellow got hit with my patented non-binary blast, and they're all gay now. Congratulations. But joking aside, this does make the play somewhat challenging to talk about, in the sense that there are moments where it is grammatically difficult to speak about it aloud, right? Because I'm going to be using they, them pronouns for all of the characters except for Haster, who I'll use they it pronouns, the king in yellow, who I will sometimes refer to as a he, a king being typically understood to be like a masculine presence. And then Casilda and Camilla, who are going to show up in the second act, the characters that are mentioned in the original short story collection, they are referred to with she, her pronouns in the text. So I will be doing that as well, although I might slip up and also use they, them pronouns for them, because at that point I'll probably be very used to doing so. All that to say, I will also be using the characters' names with more, grammatical frequency than might otherwise be usual or comfortable. So, like, if it sounds weird to listen to, just understand what I'm dealing with. Like, we're going to have multiple characters in every scene, and they're all using they, them pronouns for most of the play. So if I'm saying, like, they said this, they said that, it's like, well, did Alex say it? Did Morgan say it? Did they both say it at the same time? Which is a thing that happens at one point in the play. So bear with me. Hopefully context will clear it up. But if it doesn't, I am sorry. One final note about the play is that Scala let me know that it is not yet complete. It is what they called a near final draft. So accordingly, in addition to taking a very, very thorough tour of the play's text, in our summary portion, I'm going to be offering some feedback that might actually have the chance to be incorporated into like the final version, which is so exciting. I mean, like, that's exactly what SBU is here for, right? I know I said that about Age of Scorpius, and then that died. So hopefully it wasn't me talking about it that killed Age of Scorpius, but maybe it was, and maybe if this play is also killed, then that will be confirmation that I have like the power to destroy things by talking about them, which could be good fodder for a King in Yellow story of my own someday. So we'll see what happens. But this also means that you, the club member, are getting in on like the ground floor of the first and for now only analysis of Jay Scala's The King in Yellow, a work that, as I've said, deserves absolutely to be canonized in the Yellow mythos, right up there alongside the classics like the Chambers originals, Patrick Freiwald's Field Trip, and then some others that I unfortunately haven't had the opportunity to talk about. Maybe I will someday. We'll see. But in the meantime, let's get into that summary. So the play opens on Morgan, who is our primary protagonist. They are young, they're working class, and the cast list describes them as being optionally mask presenting, which is how I imagine them for what it's worth. We meet them sort of late at night. They're dozing in front of the TV. It's staticky, and then all of a sudden it clicks on, and there's Haster in the guise of an infomercial presenter. Are you tired of sitting there stupefied, oblivious, staring into the endless emptiness of your own cosmic insignificance? Whatever happened to your dreams? When did they become so small, so desaturated? Would you like to learn to dream in color? Well, would you? I'm talking to you. That's right, you. Go on, tell me. Would you like to dream in color? Would I like to dream in color? That's right. Sure, why not? Wonderful! This is a limited time offer, so you need to act now. Why don't you start by picking a color? Blue. Wrong color. Blue is no longer available for you. Why don't you start by picking a color? How about green? Oh, absolutely not. You don't even begin to understand what dreaming in green means. It's quite impossible. Why don't you start by picking yellow? So Haster tells Morgan it's time for the world to end and basically offers Morgan this deal. In exchange for all of their human senses and their human perspective, the ability to dream in yellow, the color of rot, to become the thing that ends the world, metamorphosing from a caterpillar that, quote, chews the cud to a butterfly. Haster doesn't really tell us what this butterfly metaphor means. Clearly the caterpillar is sort of representative of Morgan's working class life of toil, which we'll learn more about in the next scene. But the butterfly could mean any number of things. For Morgan, though, what matters is that it's obviously an escape. Reasoning that this is all just a dream and that the choice can't even really matter all that much, Morgan actually accepts the deal and wakes up. It's a fantastic first scene on a rhetorical level. So many colors, so many alternate lives have been denied Morgan, who is poor. They pick the color yellow not in pursuit of some specific goal, but rather because they've just given up hope of obtaining any other color. This will go on to define their character for the rest of the play. But beyond rhetoric, the scene is also really fun. Hastur is campy in this story, but that doesn't mean they can't also be scary, as we'll see. The next day, Morgan and their coworker Alex are at their like warehouse flavored job. We don't actually know what their job is, but the stage directions suggest that they're picking things up and like moving them around, which I think does a really good job of highlighting the sense of pointlessness and ennui that we're going for in this sort of workplace. So Morgan and Alex, they start to chat, and Morgan, who is deeply insecure, is startled when Alex offhandedly refers to Morgan as a friend. This then segues into what appears to be, from our perspective, the first meaningful conversation that these two people have ever had. Morgan explains that they went to college and that they now have a lot of debt because of that, but they use writing to cope with the anxiety that causes, along with the anxieties that they're dealing with and in other aspects of their life. Alex, on the other hand, didn't go to college and lives in their parents' basement, but is in every sense Morgan's intellectual equal and is certainly more emotionally intelligent by a good deal. They sort of work up to the point where Morgan feels ready to tell Alex about the dream that they had the previous night. And this really freaks Alex out because, as it turns out, they also recently had a dream where Hastur featured rather prominently. And in that dream, Hastur promised to alter the past so that Alex's sibling, Cam, didn't die if Alex is willing to help Hastur bring about the end of the world. Hastur says, "Focus, Alex. I need your help." Alex responds, "This isn't real. It's just a dream." "There it is again. Just a dream. You're sitting in the middle of a nesting doll of dreams. We need to dissolve a few layers, give you a half-inch of wiggle room. What do you want?" "I want to bring about the end of the world." "Hell no. The ruin of worlds is not to be feared. It can be as simple as the flick of an eyelid. Go on. Usher this world back into oblivion. Wake up." During this dream, Hastur sort of repeatedly equates the world of Alex's dream and what we would call reality. Hastur says things like, you're sitting in the middle of this nesting doll of dreams. And this equivocation between dreams and reality is going to go on to matter a lot, both in terms of narrative and theme. So hold on to this idea if you can. Returning to the conversation with Morgan, Alex admits that they're really scared. It's harder to dismiss this experience as quote-unquote just a dream if Morgan had a really, really similar one. Morgan, though, expresses kind of an indifference to the world ending. Alex says, "Are you serious? You would destroy the world and everything in it, including yourself?" Morgan responds, "Sure." "That's insane. I mean, if you truly feel that way, you could kill yourself and spare the rest of us." "Alex, I don't want to die. I just want all this to stop." "The fuck do you mean, all this?" "Do you mind if I rant?" And then boy does Morgan rant. Get ready for this. "We're fucking the environment in every conceivable way. Most people think about it in terms of burning carbon for energy, but if we stopped that today and kept everything else the same, we'd still be doomed. The forests we cut down, the coral reefs we bleach as we acidify the oceans, the fertile land that we could be cultivating renewably to feed ourselves that gets enclosed by some greedy corporation so that they can grow more soybean monocultures to export halfway across the world. All of it erodes the life support system of the planet. If energy overconsumption doesn't burn down the biosphere, resource over-extraction will rip it to tatters, and that's it. We're going to join the fossil record with the dinosaurs and the dodos, and because we're so smart, almost all the species we share this epoch with are going down with us. And it feels like absolute insanity because everyone knows this is happening, right? On some level, everyone acknowledges that we are just careening wildly towards total annihilation. You know that, right?" Alex says, "Yeah." Morgan continues, "But we just ignore it and go into work and go about our day and exist as a piece of the machinery that continues to grind all life on this planet to dust. And that's what we are, pieces of machinery, objects, not agents. We get taught in school that slavery was abolished, but it was just polished. I'm not even talking about prison slavery, just normal labor. The violence that maintains slavery has simply been obfuscated, the direct threat of the lash or the gun replaced with the implicit threat of hunger and homelessness." I'm going to skip over a little section here, but then Morgan continues. "Okay, so why do we live like this? Well, we get fed lots of justifications, but at this scale, you have to judge the thing by its results and not by its purported intent. So, what is the result? Power gets concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. That is the real function of everything we do, to subjugate our collective wills to the smallest number of agents possible, to simplify the world into a zero-sum contest for dominance. And this first principle of domination is the body of the Hydra, from which prejudices and bigotries sprout, as rationalizations for putting your boot heel on a neck that's superficially different from yours. Sometimes I feel like we're suspended in a web of rationalizations for unconscionable evil. We were born into it, so were generations of our ancestors. We don't even know what it feels like to have our feet touching the ground, to be able to look someone in the eye as an equal. We all know how wrong it is, but we keep doing it. I don't understand how we wade neck deep through inhumane sludge so we can waste our days opening the valve a little wider on the sludge pump. I feel so fucking crazy because I do it too. I don't know how to do anything else. So I've given up. I don't have any hope for this world, and if it's reduced to nothing, I don't care. Nothing would be better than the infinite torture machine run by a death cult. At least it would be quiet. Man, that's a really powerful moment. And I think it's made even more powerful by the fact that it's placed so early in the narrative. You know, these are all familiar ideas, so if they were the conclusion of the play, I don't know that I would feel so impressed by it. But this is our starting point, right? We are assuming that the reader already knows all this. We're asking them to think about these things that we already know. And then we're going to move forward from here. Kind of reminds me, of what Andrew and I were saying about Age of Scorpius. That book got a lot of flack for starting off at the point where the characters know that the government is lying to them. But Andrew and I thought, there are so many books where the conclusion is the government is lying to us, that idea itself it's just very familiar. And as like a climactic realization at the end of the novel, I think these days is likely to land very flat. And I think that this play is sort of doing what we suggested Age of Scorpius do, begin with the thing that we already know so that we can then push forward into new conceptual rhetorical territory. So let's see where it is that this play takes us. Alex responds to everything Morgan has to say with sort of an alternative perspective. They say that, maybe the universe is God experiencing itself, that old cliche. But if so, at the very least, we are participants in that. And if there is a loving God, it's one that we have the opportunity to create. On the other hand, though, if there's a hell, it's one that we all work together to construct all the time. Alex confesses that although they don't really want to end the world, they have been working on this play ever since they had the dream. And they think that the play might have the power to end the world were it ever to be staged. They keep writing, though, because it helps them cope with the death of their sibling Cam. Morgan suggests that they go and speak to their friend, that being Morgan's friend, Cass, who Alex has never met. Cass is an occultist and a dramaturge, and Alex agrees to this plan to go and see them. We then have this little POV shift onto Cass. I don't know if that's really the right term in the theater world, but we've been sort of following Morgan pretty closely, and for a minute now we're going to follow Cass. In Cass's POV, Cass is dreaming that they're in a hospital and their child, Cam, is dying of leukemia. What's important to understand here, like rhetorically, thematically, is that they have both lost people, Alex and Cass have. Alex a sibling and Cass a child. As you might expect at this point, Hastur then appears in this dream. Hastur does their usual kind of taunting routine where they're lightly negging and building up to a certain request. They give Cass a past, present, future tarot reading where first they draw the past. It's the Five of Cups, which signifies that Cass has a tragedy in their past. We know what that is. Then the present card, the Queen of Swords. This indicates that Cass is going to have to face a problem that's going to require all of their wisdom, and that they will have two students to mentor through their problems at the same time. And then finally, the future, the world reversed. Calamity, a task left unfinished. So whatever it is that Cass and their two future pupils are about to deal with, it maybe isn't going to end so well for any of them. Or maybe it will. We'll see. Cass tries to banish Hastur using their sort of witchy occult powers, but it doesn't really work. Hastur says that they were summoned by widespread nihilism, not just into Cass or Morgan or Alex's dreams, but into the world. That's actually why they're manifesting in so many places. There's so much despair all over the place that Hastur is just starting to manifest. And Hastur says that they've manifested, with the goal of ending all of this suffering, to which Cass responds that, mowing down the weeds is no good if you're also cutting down all of the flowers at the same time, which, a pretty good point. So Hastur tells a story that will probably sound pretty familiar to some of us. Before it fell to ruin, the ancient city of Carcosa was famed for its beauty. Towers that brushed through the flowering skirts of the clouds, bright lights glittering across the marquees of silver and gold. The smell of street food and perfume and the sound of lively music filled the streets. Carcosa's rulers tried to conceal its rotting ulcers from the world, but they could not hide the shattered dreams of its slaves from my sight, nor the wailing of its dispossessed from my ears. To me, the abandoned wreckage of Carcosa will always be more beautiful than its gilded towers, girded with bones and caulked with blood. There is beauty in the smell of a desert wind, or the lonesome call of an owl. Carcosa is my garden now, where I grow many beautiful things. Your seed blossomed there once, and shall be planted there again. Cass then grabs the Queen of Swords off the table, and as they do, they merge with Queen Casilda, another version of themselves from a parallel world that we're going to meet very shortly, and together they are able to banish Hastur from the dream, and they wake up. Right about then, Morgan and Alex show up to Cass's for their little planned visit. Cass confirms what Hastur has already been telling us, that they're an entity drawn to these ending worlds, to widespread nihilism and despair. And Cass clarifies for our sort of deuteragonists what the stakes are of this choice that Hastur is offering. Either let your spirit break against the world, or break the world against your spirit. And I really love this moment because it repurposes a question that's present in the original King in Yellow stories, and makes it applicable to our, contemporary era, or whatever we call this time period. In the original, letting one's spirit break against the world would be akin to giving in to one's, more decadent desires in pursuit of pleasure. Meanwhile, breaking the world against one's spirit would be, being so rigidly, so defiantly Catholic that you get into Christian heaven. So the question here is basically the same, but it's being applied to a political problem that's more immediate in 2026. Really interestingly, Cass then adds that Hastur is an entity that manifests at some point in every dimension. Cass says, "What I just read you is an excerpt from an account from the first dimension this play was written in. Its history is similar to ours until the 1880s, when our republic collapsed into the imperial dynasty of America following a broader global trend of ethno-nationalist autocracy. The country shut its borders to immigrants and forcibly relocated African Americans to Liberia or the independent state of Sewanee in what we know as Florida. By the 1920s, the quality of life was so unbearable that the first government lethal chambers were opened to provide free access to suicide as a public service. As Germany and Italy fell under the Tsar's control, an embittered communist who escaped the Romanovs' purges wrote The King in Yellow. It's said the play spread like a disease despite being universally banned and censored, and disturbing incidents spread with it. The French government thought they had seized and burned every translated copy, but it seems one slipped through their fingers, and The King in Yellow's first live performance took place at the Grand... Oh man, I should have prepared to pronounce this. Guignol. Why am I doing Italian? The King in Yellow's first live performance took place at the Grand Guignol Theatre of Paris in 1922, after which recorded history for that reality ends. After hearing this, Alex is reasonably sort of hesitant to stage the play, but they give it to Cass anyway so the cast can read over it. Alex then leaves, but Morgan stays behind for just a moment to talk to Cass. Cass refers to Morgan as a friend, and they are surprised, just as they were when Alex did the same earlier in this act. Cass asks why Morgan wants to end the world and tells them that if it's because they're lonely, then that isn't a good enough reason, because that's something that's within their power to change. But Morgan has a different reason. I have a reason, and I think that reason is why I tend to keep to myself, but my loneliness itself is not the reason. So what's your reason? Cass asks. It's like I told Alex. I'm hopeless. If your spirit's broken, you already made the wrong choice. So fix it, or find a better reason. So are you calling it off? No. I'm ready to burn it all down. But I know exactly why. If you want to be involved, you need to know too. Think about it. But if you don't know what you're doing here, it's best that you leave it alone. Cass, has a very specific reason for wanting to end the world, and it's quite similar to Alex's in that it has to do with losing someone. In the death of their child, Cass has witnessed the purposeless cruelty of the world and is basically prepared to end it in order to prevent anything like that from ever happening again to anybody. Morgan, on the other hand, only has a very shaky reason that we'll learn in just a moment. So a little bit later, Alex catches back up with Cass to talk about the play. Cass absolutely loved it. They adored it, and they are prepared to stage it so long as Alex is. The two of them are united by this grief, right? Cass lost their daughter, Alex lost their sibling, and they start to bond, and things start to get a little bit more intimate. And then we cut to black before the final scene of Act 1. And I will say that this is the last time that we see Alex in this act. And I don't know if this is really a critique or just an admission of my own failure to parse parts of the narrative. But it isn't fully clear to me, why Alex ultimately relents and allows Cass to stage the production, right? They seem like at first they were against the idea, and then suddenly they were willing to go to Cass to talk about it, and now they have agreed to do it. I can justify it to myself. Cass's reason is really their child died and they want to destroy everything, or sorry, I made the same mistake as the characters in the play. They want to end everything in order to, it seems, prevent this or this type of suffering from ever happening to anybody ever again. So I could assume that there's something similar going on with Alex there, but I'm not 100% sure if the motivations are transferable in that way. It's also interesting that Alex's stance vis-a-vis staging the play, not to spoil anything, is going to change again right in the middle of Act 2. So again, this isn't necessarily a critique, it's more of just a statement that, I have some trouble following Alex's motivations. They're definitely wishy-washy, so maybe it's by design that their choices seem a little bit less intentional. But I don't know. So late at night, Morgan is wandering the streets all alone, and Hastur appears, possessing a homeless person. Morgan recognizes Hastur, and Hastur says, "This vessel dreams. You wouldn't be surprised how many like this there are, creatures hollowed out by despair. They're easy to slip into." I love this because Hastur is mocking Morgan, and they don't even realize it. But Morgan confesses that they're really nervous about ending the world because they are unsure of their own reason, although they had expressed to Cass that they had a reason. Here's what Morgan has to say. "Why did you choose me? I get overwhelmed by the smallest things. My awareness of my own body horrifies me. Going to work makes me suicidal. I can't read the news without it becoming a problem. I feel everything and it's all too much, and I can't talk about it to anyone. I don't want to be that person spoiling everyone's lovely time. Don't fly or go on a cruise, it's shit for the environment. Don't get this or that thing made in a sweatshop. Don't have kids, they're doomed. I still eat meat. I'm full of shit. I'm not doing everything I can, but it's all too much. I need the cocoon. I need a safe place to change myself. I don't even know if I can change myself. It feels just as hard as changing the world. Ending things is so much easier." Hastur responds, "Yes, it is. Every time a species like yours ignites the spark of sentience in one of the dormant nerves of my blind idiot father, it ends the same way. A death-obsessed civilization undergoing an elaborate ritual suicide. I wonder if that's my father, murmuring in his sleep that he wishes he could die. Nevertheless, change is not impossible if you commit to it. You could be a splendid vessel." I love this mention of Hastur's father. That really gets to the essence of cosmic horror for me. We never find out who this character is, and off the top of my head, I don't think they're ever even mentioned again. But we know that there are even greater entities than the King in Yellow out there. The King in Yellow themselves, who is unbound by space and time, seems to be sort of beholden to the whims or the dreams of an even larger, even vaster entity. So we have these massive creatures within massive creatures. It really underscores the impossibility of changing anything, which is exactly what Morgan is dealing with. And it also raises the question of whether we even should, and it's that kind of ennui that makes this moment, in part anyway, so horrifying. I just love it. So anyway, after this little back and forth, Morgan eventually agrees that they are ready to change. So they formally accept Hastur's offer in the waking world. Hastur ties a strip of yellow fabric around Morgan and departs from the body of the homeless person. Then this little exchange between Morgan and the now not possessed homeless person takes place. The homeless person, who is called Inhabitant in the script, which is a really lovely reference to Ambrose Bierce's An Inhabitant of Carcosa, which, inspired The King in Yellow. The Inhabitant says, "Have you found the yellow sign?" driven a little bit crazy from having been possessed by Hastur. Morgan says, "Yeah, it's that way." "Have you found the yellow sign?" "I've got $5. I don't know if that's enough for you to get what you like, but if you're okay with me going with you, you can put whatever you want on my card." "Have you found the yellow sign?" "I'll take you there. Is that okay?" The stage directions read, "The disoriented homeless person takes Morgan's arm. They leave together to get Chinese food. Lights down. End of Act 1. If you're anything like me, you might be hearing this scene and wondering, well, does this even matter? Does this act of kindness matter even a tiny bit? Because Morgan basically just decided to end this person along with every other homeless person that has ever existed or will ever exist. So, is this kind, or is it almost sort of cruel and mocking? But more on that later, much later, but I promise there will be more. Yeah, so this is just unequivocally one of my favorite moments in the play. I love how much it challenges me, that question of whether or not this act is actually selfless. It seems like Morgan is only able to make this choice, at least on some level, because it almost doesn't matter anymore. The removal of any stakes, I suppose, helps them feel free to act in any way that they choose. It reminds me of this poem called The Day of Our Divorce Hearing, where the primary tension is one that's actually really similar. So the speaker and her ex-husband are at the end of a really turbulent marriage, but they're miraculously able to have this one last meal together, presumably because, there's no longer any stakes, right? What happens after this will happen separately. So there's no pressure, I guess, for them to be nice, and so they're able to be nice because they don't have to be, kind of paradoxically. The final lines of the poem are this: "Lately, I don't feel as if I lived with you, but I remember our kindness that day when it no longer mattered." So right at the beginning of Act 2, we have this little interlude, as though we are beginning a new play. I mentioned earlier that very true to the original King in Yellow, at least as Chambers describes it, there's a very marked shift in between Acts 1 and 2. And this play signals that by basically shattering the fourth wall. So if you've ever been to the theater before, you'll be familiar with this part of the spiel. At the very beginning of a show, someone from the cast or crew will come out and introduce the piece that they're about to perform. Here, we have Cass doing that. So Cass comes out on stage and talks directly to the audience and says, "Before we get things started, just a few housekeeping things. Please turn your cell phones off. We don't want anyone calling for help. Take a second to locate the nearest emergency exit. Now, when the emergency happens, they will all be locked, so please remain in your seat and calmly wait for the world to end. One more thing. Since the world is ending, and you might as well donate all your money to insert name of theater company putting on the show here, you can't take it with you. Alternatively, there's an off chance that the ritual fails and the world goes on, so maybe you'll want to see some more of our productions, in which case we're all very reliant on your generous support. Thanks so much, and enjoy the world premiere of The King in Yellow." The implications of this are both scary and funny, right? We've broken the fourth wall, so now The King in Yellow, the play, is happening in our real shared world, right? And this isn't just a one-off fourth wall break as a gag. It's going to come up again later, which I think, further justifies its presence. I know that some people, probably as kind of a reactionary response to the overuse of fourth wall breaking as a joke in the early 2000s, sort of cringe now when they see a fourth wall break. But this play executes it very well, I think, so I'm very happy that it's here. It also raises, an interesting thematic question, and that is that, I'm holding this play here in my hand, and it is 2 acts, but the second act of the play is sort of like a standalone 1-act play within a play. what then is the second act? And I think the answer to that is sort of like in Patrick Freiwald's Field Trip. The second act is what comes after the play is over, which of course we will see what that is. And I love that. I love that, again, we're having this concept of The King in Yellow being a play that sort of acts on the real world. It seems like it exists within the world, but also it causes things to happen in the world. It's recursive. It's hard to understand. It is logically contradictory, I suppose, in certain ways. But I don't mind that in this case. I think it's frightening. You know, I said at the beginning of the video here that the play within the play, the second act of Scala's The King in Yellow, takes place in Carcosa. And that's not technically actually true. Really, the play within the play takes place in another city situated on the Lake of Hali, an apparently prosperous city of soaring towers, a city of arts, both mundane and arcane, a city lit by a pair of familiar twin suns, yes. But this is not Carcosa, because Carcosa fell to ruins a very, very long time ago in this continuity, and it's become something of like a ghost story that's used to frighten children. This city is Yatil, and it is actually one of the last cities that survives on the rim of the Lake of Hali. Morgan, playing a character called the Stranger, who's clad in a cloak and porcelain mask, approaches the city gates. For our benefit, they offer like a little soliloquy outlining their motivations and the stakes of the narrative. The Stranger is an emissary of the Yellow King and has come to topple Yatil in exactly the same way that they toppled Carcosa. They don't plan to do this outright, however, not by conquest or violence. Instead, they intend to trick Queen Casilda into bringing the city down herself. Casilda, the Stranger says, is vain and is more concerned with securing her legacy than with the well-being of her subjects. There's this prophecy the Stranger tells us about, one that was written in the Hyades that says that if Princess Camilla ever comes to the throne, then Yatil is destined to fall, just like Carcosa did. The Stranger knows that Queen Casilda has spent Camilla's lifetime looking for a loophole in this prophecy, and the Stranger intends to offer a alleged loophole to the Queen in order to make sure that the prophecy does come true and that Yatil does collapse. So upon entering the city, the Stranger basically immediately collides with the astrologer, who's being played by Alex. In this world, Yatil thrives because of this sacred mandate of the Hyades. If the people obey it, then all is well. If they defy it, they will be destroyed. The astrologers have sort of long worked with the crown to ensure that the star's will is correctly interpreted and followed. They are basically scientists in this world, but using a magical method rather than a scientific method to arrive at truth. The main things to understand here is that astrology is an analog for science, but not in the sense that the play is making some kind of weird creationist argument that scientists are the priests of the modern world. It's just so that we have a sort of baseline understanding of how we know what is true and what is not true in this world. Basically, there are facts that can be known about the Hyades' designs, and when those facts are correctly interpreted, then things continue to work. On the other hand, if the Hyades are misunderstood, either accidentally or, deliberately in order to try to manipulate people, then bad things will happen, right? Because we won't be acting in accordance with reality. So anyway, the Stranger bumps directly into the astrologer as the astrologer is on their way to meet with Queen Casilda, because the astrologer needs to warn her that they foresaw a dark omen for Princess Camilla in the stars. The Stranger tells the astrologer that they actually once saw that exact same omen just before the fall of Carcosa, which is where they came from. The astrologer asks why the Stranger is wearing this pallid mask, and the Stranger responds that it's a custom of those few who have escaped Carcosa. People who survived that fall, they don't really trust the stars anymore, and so they hide their faces from them. It's worth mentioning that this is probably a lie, because the Stranger, as far as we know, is the only person that actually survived Carcosa, if you can even use that word, considering that they're an agent of the King in Yellow, and maybe even a direct avatar of the King in Yellow. But it's a cool detail nonetheless. It makes for a good excuse to be wearing the pallid mask, which, you gotta be wearing the palette mask if you're a stranger. It's not a King in Yellow story if a stranger's not wearing a palette mask. The stranger's like, oh, what a funny coincidence. I'm also going to see Queen Casilda. And the astrologer's like, too bad, I'm in a hurry. Do you know how to get there? And the stranger's like, yeah, totally, I'll figure it out. And the astrologer, hurries off on ahead. Meanwhile, in the throne room, Princess Camilla is sort of lamenting that her mother wants her to ascend to the throne. Camilla believes that the Hyades' prophecy is true, and she doesn't even want to rule anyways. Even if there wasn't this foretold doom, she wouldn't want to be a monarch. In specific, she is afraid of the harm that she would necessarily inflict as a ruler. She doesn't want to have the ability to influence people's lives so strongly, and she also sees herself as better suited to more artistic pursuits. She likes to sing mainly, it seems. If I could offer a brief bit of feedback here, I would really love more insight into what Camilla would like to do, if not rule. We get hints, like I said, that she'd like to be a songstress, but I think we could benefit from just a touch more. I'm looking specifically also for a sense of why. What good does she think she could do for the world as an artist that she couldn't do as queen? And or is there some specific type of harm that she's seen her mother inflict on other people that she doesn't want to be tempted into inflicting herself? I'm also curious about whether she has thoughts about how Yatil should be governed, if not by a monarch or by someone from her lineage. Who would she leave in her stead, right? Because she seems way too thoughtful of a character to just be like, I don't want to be queen, so I'm gonna fuck off now. I feel like she must have some plan, and I would like for us to be let in on what that plan is. And I think that brief additions to the conversations that already exist in this sequence of the play could clear these problems up, super, super easily. Anyway, as Camilla is sort of lamenting to herself, Queen Casilda enters, and the two get into this argument about, whether or not Camilla should be crowned. Casilda insists that she has led Yatil for her whole life, and over that lifetime, she's had to respond to all kinds of crises, including plagues and wars, even events that the stars never, explicitly foretold and didn't really help them get through. She urges Camilla to likewise be an agent in her own life and to avoid relying on the stars too much or acting out of fear for what might go wrong. As readers, it's meant to be really clear to us that Casilda holds a semi-irrational position here. As I said, in this world, if the stars foretell something, it comes true. This makes Casilda something like an analog for a science denier, at least in respect to her position on the stars. She denies the stars, which are always right, which means that she is wrong. I would really like to know a bit more about how she justifies this position to herself, though, because even if there have been instances where the stars didn't offer advice or didn't predict something and she kind of had to go it alone as a ruler, there must have been lots of instances throughout her reign where the stars were correct in what they predicted. I mean, the story sort of suggests that this was the case, but we don't have any concrete examples. So I think what we could do here is maybe get some insight into these plagues that are mentioned, the ones that she says that she, quelled by her own strong leadership. Maybe if we knew how she went about that, we would better understand why she believes what she believes, even though it's irrational. Why, at the very least, she is wary of what the stars have to say or is resentful of them or something like that. But towards the end of this conversation, Casilda offers Camilla a deal. If Camilla can give one non-Hyades related reason that they ought not be crowned, then Casilda will drop the issue forever. But Camilla isn't able to think of one off the top of their head and sort of storms off out of the scene. Right about then, the astrologer enters, and as you might expect from someone who's been so dismissive of prophecy and astrology, Casilda is not a fan of this character. The astrologer then goes on to tell her what we already know, that Camilla must not become queen because there's this dark omen that seems to confirm that the prophecy might be at risk of coming true. It seems like we're moving in a direction in which Camilla might be crowned, in which case Yatil is going to get sort of fucked up. But Casilda is really tired of hearing about this, and she actually threatens to expel the Order of Astrologers from the land if they keep bringing this issue up. And this is, I don't know, I found this sort of funny, but it's also a major political shift from previous monarchs, we're told, and it shakes the astrologer. They're afraid of seeing their order cast out from one of the last standing kingdoms on the Lake of Hali. So They hurry out, but not before warning Casilda that a stranger from Carcosa is also on their way to see her, and that she should maybe listen to what the stranger has to say, if she won't listen to the astrologer. Now, Casilda is shocked to hear that anyone survived the fall of Carcosa, and sort of monologues for our sake about what happened there and why she is surprised that someone survived. She says, "For all my childhood, across the lake, like jewels on the horizon glimmering in twilight's final rays, I saw the spires of bright Carcosa, famous for its wealth, unmatched in scholarship and industry, the pride of Hali's shores. Then it was gone. The cause of its demise is a mystery. Where once I saw its edifices rise, nothing but silent fog swirled in the dusk. My mother sent ships to investigate and render aid to any who survived, yet neither word nor soul from that doomed voyage ever returned to tell Carcosa's tale. Its disappearance haunts me to this day. At times I cast my gaze across the lake to where Carcosa stood, and viscous fog swallows my sight and suffocates my thoughts with maddening conjecture of what doom unmade the greatest city of this age. In this world, there are some phenomena beyond my understanding great enough to topple cities. This astrologer, though I despise their words, may rightly warn of some misfortune in Camilla's reign. I must interrogate this traveler, draw the elusive truth from their report, the truth which like a phantom stalks my thoughts, invisible, yet with its frigid breath, brushing my vertebrae with winter's chill." Unfortunately for everyone, though, when the stranger does arrive, they tell Casilda exactly what she wants to hear. With a little bit of time and some resources, the stranger insists that they can find a way to satisfy what the stars have predicted without preventing Camilla from coming to power. During the course of this conversation, the stranger also mentions that the King in Yellow destroyed Carcosa because he was quote-unquote jealous of its splendor. And to my recollection, this is the only time the king is described of being jealous of human flourishing. Elsewhere, the king appears to be a force that makes real the desires of the downtrodden. For example, way back in Act 1 during Alex's dream, Hastur claimed to have helped settlements around the Lake of Hali rebuild after flooding them. This would mean that Hastur played a key role in both the flooding of the basin that became the Lake of Hali and helping people rebuild afterwards. In both cases, giving people what they thought they wanted, especially, it seems, when those desires would have large and unexpected negative consequences. So I'm not really sure where this bit about jealousy comes from, or if this is also just a lie. Just sort of like a weird thing that stood out to me every time I read the play. I really don't know that it matters at all. Casilda accepts this proposition. She agrees to let the stranger stay in her court, and the stranger will research the prophecy in great detail and try to find a way to sort of like satisfy its requirements while also letting Camilla become queen. Camilla leaves the scene, which leaves the stranger standing alone on the stage, and they say, "Do you not see her fetid arrogance? How she would rather all her nation rot than be deprived of even a jot of power? Yet while she writhes and shudders at the thought of subjugation, how many poor souls within Ytil are subject to her whims, all powerless to question or to choose some other path more sensible to them. For all the agency these serfs command, they may as well be fettered to the stars. So distant and aloof their gracious queen sits from the grinding march of their travails. But she will not be ruled? Oh, hypocrite, proud, scornful, haughty, sneering hypocrite." The stranger explains that in a really nice parallelism to Morgan, they grew up really poor in Carcosa. They had to work really, really hard, even to just survive. And so when the end came, when the King in Yellow arrived and decided that it was time for Carcosa to fall, they and the other impoverished residents of the city sort of welcomed it. They continue, "And our despair the King in Yellow heard, the only king that ever earned a knee, who would not let the wretched of the earth be fed as fuel to blasphemous machines. And so we welcomed in Carcosa's end with pounding chant and metamorphic dance, as I shall do again. Are you afraid? Do not fear the ending of an age whose cornerstones are cut from misery. Let's snap the rusted chains and be set free. So there's this sense that the end of Carcosa was sort of a collective choice that was led by the king, but nonetheless something that the people really wanted for themselves. There is something here in this scene, though, that I wish we knew more about, and it's that we don't really see Casilda subjugating people in the way that we're told the government of Yatil does. To the extent that a just monarchy is possible, she seems to me like a qualified enough ruler. Like, aside from the whole Hyades denial thing, I think we could maybe do a tiny bit more to communicate the ways in which the poor people of Yatil are suffering under Casilda's reign. Maybe this is something that could be communicated in the set. Like, maybe if the palace is looking kind of shabby, or if the palace is looking really nice, but then all the scenes set outside the palace, although there aren't many now that I think of it, all look especially shabby, then we would get a sense that there is a really, really strong class divide, which would help make this problem feel more real and more present. But just to sum up, the people of Yatil are oppressed as the people of Carcosa were oppressed, and the stranger is here to make sure that Yatil meets its just end, just like Carcosa did. A little later, the stranger is like chilling in the Royal Archive, pretending to do research on that loophole, when they're joined by Camilla. Camilla and the stranger have this really interesting dynamic. As a reader, I'm left with the sense that the stranger genuinely likes Camilla as a person and regrets that they don't live in a continuity where she is able to be crowned queen. I think that the stranger thinks of Camilla as like a very qualified ruler, in part, if not especially, because Camilla does not want to rule. You know, it's like that classic paradox about how the best leaders are the ones who don't actively seek out leadership. Camilla definitely fits that archetypal profile. But beyond that, they also just have like a very sweet, very nice dynamic. It's not at all romantic or anything. I hope the word sweet isn't guiding you to think that. They seem to like get along well. And there's honestly, now that I think of it, not a lot of other characters who we see in the play getting along in this way. Alex and Morgan are very much at the beginning of their friendship during the first act. Morgan and Cass are implied to have had a long-standing friendship, but the one scene we really see of them focuses more on, Alex and the play and whether or not they'll stage it. And then they get that moment together at the end where Cass comes across to me as like a little bit chastising, and it's deserved, but it still doesn't give you, the warm fuzzies. So I don't know. I enjoy that this dynamic is here, and it makes what happens more impactful and more tragic for its presence, I think. So anyway, Camilla comes into the archive, and after a little bit of conversation, makes a deal with the stranger. And Camilla requests that if they are successful in making it so that they are crowned queen, that the stranger will ask Casilda to relieve Camilla of her duty to rule anyways. And the stranger is like, well, girl, that's not gonna happen, but I will try. Camilla exits, and Casilda then enters the archive. She's not here to chat, though. She's like in middle manager mode, so she's like, stranger, I need the updates, I need the deets, what's up with the loophole, give it to me. And the stranger is like, well, as it happens, I've found something. There is a bit in the prophecy, there's various versions of the prophecy, but one thing that they all have in common is that they use words like witness Camilla come to power or see her ascend to the throne. So the stranger comes up with this idea that like, well, what if nobody could ever see Camilla, right? Like, what if she was crowned while completely covered from head to toe in masks and robes and gloves and all that kind of stuff, and she just wore it for the rest of her life whenever she was around anybody ever. And Casilda's like, well, that fucking sucks. We're not gonna do that one. And the stranger's like, okay, sure, whatever. I have another idea. What if the only thing that people don't see is the coronation itself? Because the language of the prophecies can be read in such a way that the seeing applies only to the actual, like, event of ascension to the throne. And Casilda's like, okay, now you're speaking my language. This seems a lot more attainable. So they come up with this little scheme. Not only will they hold a masquerade ball where everyone is going to be completely covered from head to foot, they are also going to select the person to ascend to the throne at random. Apparently, in some kind of way, if there is chance involved, if Camilla is not, deliberately selected, but just so happens to be the one that is picked, then maybe that will be enough of a loophole to avert disaster. To Cassilda's credit, she is rather skeptical of this very dubious sounding plan, but she's ultimately overcome by her own desire to see her lineage continued, and so she's like, okay, sure, full send on this one, let's give it a try. The stranger says, "If you insist, the heir to your estate when they shall be invested are a guest of honor at a ceremonial ball, or so I read Ytil's tradition runs. If all there in attendance were disguised that you to your successor would be blind, Camilla could by happenstance be raised into the office you intend for her, remaining unforeseen in her ascent, that future vexing stars might needle nod upon the passage of her monarchy." And I'm not 100% sure in what way leaving the decision up to chance would thwart the Hyades. The stranger says, in this exact moment, that the stars have power over only human designs and plans, but the chance is that the domain of the elder gods alone. And there's some opacity about how much of this is truth and how much of this is lie, because the stranger lies fucking constantly. It's like their favorite hobby after being sort of fruity. So it might not really matter, but it did make me pause and ask myself if I had missed something, especially because the idea of chance being something that the elder gods kind of rule over, that there's this kind of pantheon in which elder gods and the Hyades both exist, isn't really prominent elsewhere in the text. So maybe a tiny bit of clarification could help here, but I was still very much on board and following along. Everybody starts to get ready for the ball. Cassilda, who wants to make absolutely sure that she can recognize Camilla at the ball, despite the point being that she can't, she wants to circumvent this and be able to recognize her anyway, gives her daughter a bunch of really distinctive jewelry along with her mask and robe. And it's worth noting here that this is not a plot hole. This is presented to us as evidence of Cassilda's willful dismissal of things she knows to be true. She knows that this risks closing the loophole that they work so hard to identify, but she does it anyway because she is so desperate to see herself, basically, spiritually continue to rule in her daughter. Camilla, though, realizes what her mom is up to. The stranger presents her with this outfit that has all these gaudy gems, and she's like, okay, well, I'm going to distribute all of these outside the ball among everybody so that everybody will be wearing one thing that was meant to identify me, and that'll throw off my mom's plans. And she and the stranger have a little giggle about that. But unbeknownst to either of them, Cassilda actually worked in a failsafe because she anticipated that her daughter would see through this plan with the gems. What she did was treat Camilla's robes with some kind of alchemical substance that leaves behind kind of a faint ghostly trail that you wouldn't be able to see unless you knew that you were looking for it. So that way she'll still be able to distinguish her daughter from among all the guests, even without the jewels being in play. The ball gets going, and we get this little moment of the astrologer sneaking in. Although they weren't invited, they work their way in among the guests, equipped with this cockamamie plan to run away with Camilla. But more on that in a moment. First, we shift our perspective to the stranger and Cassilda, who are dancing together. Meanwhile, the stranger dances with Queen Cassilda. She's really nervous, so the stranger tells her a story to help her get her mind off of things. This story is one that concerns Queen Hali, the first ruler of Ytil. Now, Cassilda is like, wait a second, it's impossible that you, a stranger, could know anything about Hali that I don't already know because, I'm the queen, she's my ancestor. But the stranger is like, oh, well, this is a story that's been kept secret for a really, really long time. So Queen Hali, as the story goes, was once a common flower girl who loved a shepherd boy named Haita. They often spent the night in his cave up in the hills, but Hali was bothered immensely by one particular trait of Haita's, and that was his curiosity. Often, Haita would ask Hali, "Why do you love me?" And here Cassilda stops the stranger. She says, "This is a slander to the empress whose iron will raised Ytil's mighty walls. Perhaps this Haita served her in war, or as a fool or minstrel in her train." But the stranger responds, "From highest queen to meanest scavenger, we all arrive and leave this world the same. And through the roiling progress of the years, may call the gutter and the palace home, both in their time by fickle circumstance. So anyway, Hali thought about this question that Haita was always asking, do you love me? And eventually came to an answer. Her answer was, I love you for my claim upon your heart, that I may call you mine and mine alone. This answer, interestingly, completely horrified Haita, who immediately ordered Hali to leave his cave and never ever return. But as the weeks passed, he came to miss her as much as he sort of resented her, and he eventually prayed to Hastur that rain would flood the valley and the cities in it where Hali lived. And just like in the original Haita the Shepherd story, although he prayed for different reasons and not for rain, the god answered and sent a storm so intense that it filled the basin at the mouth of the valley and formed what would eventually become the Lake of Hali. Unbeknownst to Haita, though, Hali emerged as the leader of the refugees of the flood, and eventually became the queen of one of the first cities to form on the lakeshore. Years and years later, Haita learned that Hali was still alive and composed a poem that he hoped would win her back. This obviously didn't work because poetry sucks and everyone hates it, so Haita decided to deploy Plan B, which was to go to this other lake, a lake of sorrow, like literal sorrow. He somehow enters this place where these mental states, these metaphors are real. And what he does is he tears out his ability to love and drowns it in the lake. The Hyades watched this happen and were so disturbed by it that they cursed Hali's line with the prophecy that we all know very well by now. The prophecy that is the whole reason this ball is happening in the first place. Casilda, hearing this, responds, "Then I am bound to this cursed lineage but for the pain of one ill-fated love? There is no justice in the starry skies when trivial faults incur such monstrous blights." The stranger says, "Nor is there justice in this world of dust. 'Twas not that Hali could not love Haita, but that she loved dominion above all, which stretched this curse across the centuries. Empires may fall by more than violent shocks." Right about then, Casilda decides to stop dancing and announce the beginning of the ball's main event, which is a bigger dance that involves everybody. This will be the one that will conclude at midnight, at which she will select a quote-unquote random person from the attendees and crown them the next ruler of Yatil. Having some alchemical prowess of their own, as soon as the dance begins, the astrologer is able to track down Cam and starts trying to convince them to run away with them. But she isn't really having any of it. They have this back and forth where she's like, no, I'm not going to run away. And then the astrologer gets desperate and something really interesting happens. The astrologer says, "Camilla, I beseech you on my knees." Camilla responds, "Rise, your sweet courage I will never forget, but risk not greater danger with such pleas. I cannot be persuaded, so begone." Alex then breaks character. "Cam, please, you have to run. You have to get out of here." Camilla, not Cam, Camilla responds, "I fear I do not comprehend your words." Alex says, "Cam, I'm serious. You need to run. They're going to kill you." Camilla says, "Have you forgot what you were meant to say? Gracious Camilla might start your next line. They're going to fucking sacrifice you, Cam. Do you not get it?" Then Camilla breaks character as Alex lunges for them and says, "What the fuck? Don't touch me." Alex says, "Cam, please." "I'm not Cam. Get off of me," says Camilla. And then Alex says, "What are you all doing just sitting there watching? Stop the play. They're going to kill them. Please, please." Camilla says, "Guards, quickly, come subdue this lunatic." As they're being dragged away, Alex says, "Please, you've got to stop them. You've got to stop this. I was wrong. I can't go through with this. I can't lose them again." Great scene, very dramatic. I was not expecting the characters to break character. I'm not 100% clear on why there is a sacrifice and why it should be Cam. I think what we're meant to draw from this is that the characters are having to kind of like reenact their own trauma in order to end the world. And so for Cass and Alex, that means killing Cam. But this is actually, to my recollection, the first time in the play that the word sacrifice is invoked, which feels somehow like it's drawing from like a different religious system than what we've had so far. I know that probably sounds like such a huge fucking nitpick, but it did throw me off for just a second. Anyway, I think it's very cool that Alex changes their mind again. They've been so wishy-washy throughout the whole play, and they break character, which is a wishy-washy thing to do, and then they're like, we need to stop the play. So even like in this world of parallelisms, we have, the parallel character of the astrologer being indecisive, and then we have Alex butting in to be indecisive. It works on a lot of levels. I think it's really cool. So guards flood into the ballroom, and I'd like to remind you at this point, in case you forgot, it got lost in my summary, that all of these extra characters are played by Hastur, right? Like, individual members of the hive mind that is Hastur. So all these yellow-clad guards come in, and they drag Alex backstage, and they cut out their tongue when Casilda orders it, which is so brutal. In all of that commotion, time has totally flown by, and all of a sudden, the moment of the coronation is at hand. And wouldn't you know it, what a crazy, wacky coincidence, this silly world that we live in. Casilda just happens to choose her daughter completely by chance. I mean, wow, what are the odds, right? Camilla begs her mother to reconsider, but of course, Casilda just refuses flat out. Everyone is like, all right, well, I guess we're done here. They start to unmask, and Casilda orders the stranger to unmask as well. Casilda says, "Why do you still conceal your face?" Camilla says, "Kind stranger, for your faithful promise kept, I thank you. Now receive your own reward, and do not with discourtesy invite my mother to deny you your dessert. You, sir, should unmask." The stranger, "Indeed?" Camilla says, "Indeed, it's time. We have all laid aside disguise but you." The stranger says, "I wear no mask." Camilla, "No mask! No mask!"
Say the line, Bart!
"No mask."
Yeah!
They then continue, "Just so. Yet you still wrap yourselves in cunning veils, your rotten natures covered to the world. Oh, who among this vulture's court saw not that poor astrologer, by anguish racked, plead for the safety of this faultless girl, and raised more than a stutter to oppose their tortuous and unjust punishment? Why, none of you, still these neutral masks, show your dispassion to this broken world, without a drop of shame to blush your cheeks." And I think the point here, aside from this being, like a pretty cool light Yagami moment, is that the people who had the power to do something to avert the ritual, or, really just do anything at all, there were people who were immediately in the room, who had the opportunity, and who might have had motivation to, at the very least, stop the astrologer from having their tongue cut out, but they didn't. And this is going to become more clear, if it isn't clear already, that this moment isn't just like a dramatic, climactic, emotional moment for these characters, but is meant to comment upon our real world. There are people in positions of power right now who would tell you that they want to do good things that would benefit the common people, but they actually don't do anything at all. So I'm really glad that this moment is here. The stranger continues, "The king in yellow is your sovereign now. In his court no illusion may survive, and yours the most offensive mask of all, the mask of queen, that ludicrous disguise which grants you pretense of supremacy, who are no better than a wriggling worm, a transient thing of dust and dew composed, whose lifespan is to Hastur but a blink. What poison gnaws your mind that you believe that you should dictate to the multitudes the turning of their lives? Ah, once perhaps you were capacious of empathy until you hung upon the hooks of power to have your caring organs disemboweled." What a great image. Oh my god. The stranger then pushes Camilla over. She drops the ceramic mask that she had been wearing, and she falls on its shattered pieces, and they stab her through the chest. At this point, chaos breaks out. People are running and screaming. The earth is shaking. These noxious mists have started to fill the ballroom. And in the midst of it all, Casilda is on the floor with her daughter, talking to her dead body, shaking it, trying to get her to wake up so that they can flee together. And all of a sudden, just like happened in Cass's dream earlier, but in reverse, Casilda and Cass sort of merge, and Camilla blurs with Cam, and we see at the same time. I have no idea how this would be achieved, on an actual stage, but in the theater of my mind, it works well. We see these four characters kind of merge, the ballroom and the hospital bed, and the shards poking out of Cam's flesh, and Casilda remarks that the jagged edges of it reminds her of the silhouette of Carcosa, and that's the end of the scene. So everything fades out, and when the lights come back up, we are with Morgan in some kind of nowhere space between dimensions. We are at, the end of the world, wherever that is. Morgan says, "I had a vision of the world as a cocoon. We were supposed to burst out of it like a majestic butterfly and open our wings to sail across the stars. Something went wrong, though, a disease, I think, a psychic plague called greed. Now, in my mind, the cocoon is rotting. It stinks of gasoline and garbage. It drips with toxic chemicals and blood. I fear the thing that will emerge from such a cocoon, some horrendous parasite that would drain the light from the stars to grow itself. I still believe in that butterfly, though, sunlight streaming through its translucent wings, a beautiful golden yellow. I let its larvae nibble on the sinews of my heart. When it explodes out of me, the rhythm of its beating wings will beat with the beat of my heart, like a timpani across the cosmos." Morgan then metamorphoses into Hastur, who has a monologue of their own. Here's just an excerpt from it, because it's quite long. "Now we fulfill the promised end, the dawning of an age of fear. Let wretched cries of tortured souls no more sink in obscurity, but sound with cacophonic toll as prelude to doom's symphony. The Armageddon anthem sounds with lilting tune through empty streets and mournful cry over barren grounds. Its final chorus now repeats, 'Song of my soul, thy voice is dead. Die thou unborn as tears unshed must dry and die in Carcosa.'" In the final scene of the play, we pick up with Cass, Cam, and Alex sitting in another sort of liminal pocket dimension. I kind of think of this as the closure dimension, more on that later. Cam informs them that they have been here for quite a while, and that here, all time, everything is happening all at once, which will take a little bit of getting used to for Alex and Cass. As I was reading this scene, I found myself wondering if maybe Hastur came from a place like this, because Hastur mentions many times across the play that time is all simultaneous to them. Here's how the play ends. "What happens now?" Alex and Cam ask sort of simultaneously. Cam says, "This, forever. Everything else forever, too." Cass and Cam say at the same time, "Everything is always happening." And Cam responds, "Exactly. It's not like we're stuck here. The dimensions you're used to and 1,000 you aren't are just beyond that curtain. We're always leaving, always returning, always holding hands. We're floating in the satellite where they broadcast dreams until we decide to go to sleep or wake up. I can't tell which is which anymore. This is nice. I had a dream you held my hand before I woke up here. Please, just keep holding my hand until we all fall asleep again." Then Alex and Cass say in unison, "I won't let go. I promise." I'm crying, bro. It's so good. So I've mushed all of my feedback and analysis into a single section. So we're going to try to sort of freestyle weave between what I think is working, which is most of it, what I think could be a little bit improved, of which there is a bit, and then the analysis of what the play is trying to tell us, which is also pretty substantial. I'll start out with something that, I don't know, might be controversial. I really, really dig the language in the second half of the play. I know that this will probably sound pretty dorky to the non-poetry folks here, which I'm just going to go ahead and assume is like 99.999% of you. But the blank verse, which is sort of unrhymed iambic pentameter, which means that each line is 10 syllables long and has that like da-dum, da-dum, da-dum beat, I think is really great. It's so musical in this play, in part because it doesn't follow its own rules too rigidly. Lines will be slightly longer or slightly shorter if it creates better flow. We will sometimes have a trochaic beat instead of an iambic beat. A trochaic beat is just where the emphasis of the beats is flipped. Don't worry about it. But we'll sometimes have one of those if it allows for a more interesting word. And I just think that it all comes together to create something that, like, evokes the idea of an older play without feeling like the play is trying hard to actually be antiquated, which often to me comes across as insecure when I come across it in other work. I will admit, though, that even after I read the first act, I was halfway through, I was totally bought in on everything that was happening. I got really nervous when I turned the page over to the second act and saw these big columns of blank verse. I was like, oh man, if this ends up not working, I'm going to be really disappointed because I was so invested. I knew right then that I was going to have to finish it, even if it was torturous. But Scala won me right back over within the first couple of stanzas. The execution is so good in part because I get the impression that it is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Like, it knows that it is a bit campy, a bit silly to be doing this. But it also commits to that bit, which then has that really lovely quality of like, is this a joke? Is this not a joke? And I think it's great. It's a delight to read. I can only imagine that it would be a delight to hear acted out. And it's very fun. And it contributes to the aesthetic as well, because even reading the original King in Yellow, Chambers sometimes feels a little bit antiquated, even for, over 100 years ago. So being a little bit antiquated in this modern interpretation of the text, it feels very natural. I do have one slight caveat, though, about how the meter and the language interact, and that would be this. There are places where I think the combination of iambic meter and deliberately antiquated imagistic language kind of get carried away with themselves. I feel like there's a couple of monologues where the characters start free associating and then they can't stop. And because they all do this, every single major character has at least one of these moments, and most of them have multiple. I mean, by moments, I mean just, longer soliloquies. Their voices start to feel a bit homogenous, and I think that that's kind of a shame, because the characters' voices were very, very distinct in the first act. I think that one way you could fix this would be just to shorten some of the characters' soliloquies. Just cut out some of those lists of images, maybe. You could justify this staying as it is, though. I mean, this play was being written by Alex, who we're told is like a novice playwright. So maybe they're struggling to balance their own authorial voice with the voices of their various characters, but I don't know. Justified or unjustified, I think that the slightly homogenized voices combined with, the tiny bits of fluff that compound across many different monologues impinge upon my reading experience somewhat. And I do mean somewhat. It's not by any means like a fatal problem, but it's noticeable in my opinion. In addition to the meter, another thing that I really love in this play is the way that Hastur is portrayed. Something that I think might have gotten lost in my summary is that this character is played by a small choral ensemble, another way in which the play is jokingly being a little bit antiquated, having a choral ensemble to begin with. But it also reflects the character's non-locality, their omnipresence, which is very, very creepy. And I love how they split up to play all of the side characters. That's very economical, but it also serves as a reminder that this character can be anywhere that they need to be whenever they need to be there. Scala's Hastur really drives home for me Hastur as a hyper object in the philosophical sense. They are, as Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock puts it in Gothic Things, they're interdimensional, they're powerful beyond comprehension, and they are seemingly immortal. And the play lets their immensity and unknowableness be known, for example, by allowing Hastur to explain that from their point of view, the world in which we live is really just a dream to be woken up from, and that might sound nonsensical or minimizing to us, but Hastur really seems to believe this. They act in ways that suggest that they really believe this. They try to convince other characters to believe this. And so the incomprehensibility becomes something that we are forced to accept if we want to follow the play. And I also just love that Hastur is a little bit theatrical and a little bit fruity, and then that fruitiness gets sort of translated to the stranger as well when Morgan is playing that character. In Morgan's dream, Hastur plays the character of a salesperson, and it's not lost on me that in the first scene of the play they're making these jokes about the colors of the rainbow, right? And then later in the play they're going on to read tarot, which while not inherently queer, has a lot of queer associations in 2026. I guess I just want to say that on a personal note, I feel kind of represented by this character in a way that I don't often feel represented by other non-binary characters, even in other media that I really like. For instance, there's that one non-binary character in Talk to Me, who just sucks. Like, I don't think that character's depiction as sucking is like problematic or something, because non-binary people can suck and that character feels convincingly like a real person. Like, it actually reminds me of people that I have known. But like, it's nice to feel represented by a character that one also likes. So I gotta give the play credit for that. Speaking of great character writing, it probably wasn't lost on you that the characters that the main cast plays when they are in the play within the play parallel them, in various ways. So the stranger, resents people in power the way that Morgan does. The astrologer is a little bit flaky, kind of like Alex. But I think that my favorite parallelism is probably Casilda to Cass. So in Casilda, we see some of Cass's character traits exaggerated and made dangerous to herself and others in a way that serves the purpose of Casilda being sort of a villain in the second act. So Cass is very smart, but they're also very willful, and they're vulnerable to bullshit because they are so smart. They maybe think that they are too smart to be tricked. And the way that we see them fall for bullshit in the real world in the first act is that they talk about like crystal magic and stuff. Like they genuinely seem to believe that like amethyst has spiritual properties. But then in Casilda, this manifests as a denial of inconvenient astrology, which, as we've started to talk about already, is like an analog for science, right? So we have this kind of kooky thinking from the real world blown up into full-on conspiratorial reality denialism in Casilda. Cass is also like kind of a little bit presumptuous about their own like status as a person. When they lecture Morgan about their reasons for wanting to end the world, the advice that they offer is good, but the way that they offer it is a little bit condescending. And then of course we regularly see Casilda be kind of a dick to everybody in the second act. We also can't forget that Cass wants to end the world because their child is dead. And Casilda is, monomaniacal about their need to secure their legacy via their daughter, Camilla, which is a major contributing factor leading to the end of the world. So all of those parallelisms, I think, are so cool. You could definitely do this same thing for the astrologer and Alex and the stranger and Morgan, but I just picked this one because it's my favorite. So let's talk about this character, Hali, Haita's erstwhile lover and then the eventual first queen of Yatil. As a little refresher, here is basically her whole deal. She dated Haita, she mistook possession of him for love of him, she got broken up with, she used the flooding to become the leader of a group of refugees, and then she founded the city of Yatil and was crowned its first queen. This character, Hali, is fully an invention of Scala, the author of the play. Those who've read Haita the Shepherd, or who might have seen my video will recall that in the original story, Haita's lover is actually happiness, capital H happiness, like the concept, not Hali. So in Scala's The King in Yellow, a fable about how happiness can only be found when we're not really looking for it and will only stay when we aren't thinking too hard about it, becomes kind of a critique of mistaking ownership for love. And in a way, Scala's The King in Yellow lays everything that happens in the world of the play at Hali's feet. It's because she thought possessing Haita was the same of loving him that the world would eventually end. And the first thing I gotta say about this is that it's really brilliant commentary on the kind of love that Chambers sometimes celebrated in the original King in Yellow stories. In The Mask, for instance, Genevieve, the protagonist's love interest, is just not an agent. She's barely a character. She is something to be obtained. She's the goal of the story. Once the character has obtained or failed to obtain her, the purpose of the story will be fulfilled. And for a significant portion of the story, she is literally an object, like not just within the structure of the story, but she is literally a statue that is willed to Alec when his friend Boris dies. As I said in my video analyzing that story, we know basically nothing about Genevieve and even less about what she and Alec might have in common. Whether they're even compatible romantic partners is completely opaque to the reader. Chambers expects us to assume that because this is a short story written in the romantic tradition, we will just accept that Genevieve is the thing that will satisfy the protagonist's yearning. to be fair, this does make sense given sort of the default story structure of the time, but that doesn't mean that we can't criticize it, because I do think it's like kind of problematic and also sort of oversimplistic. By becoming his girlfriend, the story argues, Genevieve will provide Alec, a socially, morally, and religiously acceptable outlet for his desires that would be inappropriate in other contexts, according to the text. In my video, I jokingly floated the idea that Alec, Boris, and Genevieve could try out polyamory and that we could see, how that goes. But the story rules that out not because it was rationally considered and then eliminated as an option, but because it's sort of baked into the presuppositions of the story's like ethical romantic framework that would just be cosmically, spiritually wrong. In any case, Genevieve is reduced to a thing to be obtained, and likewise in Rue Bar, the final story in The King in Yellow, the main boys are concerned with being the one to get Rue Bar, this woman who earned the nickname because she's known for refusing men's romantic advances. But Rue Bar's personality and Rue Bar's desires barely enter into the equation at all. Then when Selby eventually realizes that Rue Bar is not right for him, it's because he comes to think of her as too quote-unquote pure for him. He is a dirty, sinful thing, and she is this pure woman who is above him in some spiritual capacity. And that, too, as I've said previously, is actually minimizing and kind of infantilizing and kind of objectifying. Because Rue Bar is not like a pure little small being angel. She's like a working woman who has a lot of experience with men, the story implies, more than Selby has with women. So I love that Scala includes this same trope in their play. Hali feels quote-unquote completed by Haita, she wants to own him, and she mistakes this for love, which the play correctly identifies, I think, as pretty toxic. Yet, I don't know that we know enough about Hali for this inversion to land as neatly as it could. It's good, but I think it could be even better. In the Chambers originals, we know about our would-be possessors, Alec, Selby, and others throughout the book. But here, our possessor, Hali, is a total mystery. This leaves me wondering, is her mishandling of her relationship with Haita really so grave that it's deserving of like this ancestral punishment? The story seems to want us to think of Hali as uniquely cruel, almost as like a Dahlia Hawthorne type character who enjoys hurting people. But that doesn't really quite work for me thematically, because if Hali is just, if she's just like that, then it doesn't really make sense to punish her for being that way. Something else that The King in Yellow does deal with thematically, the originals, is this idea that certain qualities about people are just ineffable and that they can be our doom. So this does work on that level, but I don't know. I still have a suggestion that I think could make this whole bit stronger. I guess what I'm trying not to say, because it sounds kind of harsh, is that Hali's whole deal feels a little bit too backgrounded, and I don't have context about her other than what comes from unreliable sources like Haster, which causes my uncertainty about who she is and what she did and whether she deserved what she got to be even more compounded. Fortunately, though, I have two suggestions that I think could be relatively easy to implement. The first, in my opinion, less preferable revision would involve spending more time on Hali as an individual. Is she uniquely cruel? Does she have like a traumatic backstory that made her this way? The reason I consider this alteration suboptimal is because it's going to require backfilling more exposition during Act 2, and that risks kind of taking hits to the pacing. But regardless, I think the option is there. It's worth considering. But my second suggested revision would be this. What if we just like swap Hali and Haita's role? What if Haita was the one who mistook his possessiveness of Hali for love? Right? This would nicely sort of provide an alternative ending or continuation of the existing Haita the Shepherd story, in which, after learning that happiness, or in this case, Hali, cannot be held onto, Haita begins to spiral and starts looking for things he can possess, ultimately landing on power in the form of controlling the refugees who survived the flood that maybe in this version he prays for in order to save them, which would be kind of like a syndrome thing to do. I'm not opposed to that. But it could also be the case that Hali is the one to pray for the flood. Or maybe she doesn't pray explicitly for a flood, but that when she prays, the Hyades are so mad on her behalf that they then flood the cities of the plains anyway. A situation of which, in this case, Haita would just sort of take advantage in order to become king. I think that this would let us have both a critique of the misogynist tropes that Chambers sometimes deployed and also an extension of the original Haita story while eliminating any confusion about Hali's backstory. You know, anybody who's read Haita the Shepherd, which is very easy to do because it's like, I don't know, 3 pages long or something, would then have the context to understand why this inversion of the Haita story is being made in the play. The original story would serve as the backstory for this bit of the play, and then we don't have to worry about trying to understand this new character who never actually appears on screen, like what her motivations and backstory are. So, I don't know. I think the version that we have on the page works pretty well, but I think that potentially this could be a slight improvement. So Morgan has this really big rant in the first act. Perhaps you remember it. It spans, if you look at it visually, like it spans like several pages, and it's followed by a much shorter but still substantial response from Alex that offers sort of an alternate like perspective on things. It's a more hopeful perspective, but it's also a little bit tentative, a little bit cagey. Morgan's attentions in their part of the conversation are super scattered. They range from climate disaster to modern day slavery to their own complicity in like extractive capitalist systems by which they are of course also oppressed. Reading Morgan's rant, it really is sort of like a fire hose of free associative anxieties right to the face. And while I maintain that relatability on its own has never been and will never ever be the measuring stick for quality literature, I feel like I would be lying by omission if I didn't acknowledge that I felt I needed to talk about Scala's work here at Club, in large part because of the presence of this scene. I relate to what is happening to Morgan here, both what they are saying and the way in which they are saying it. And I also relate to the fact that they feel compelled to share it with Alex, but also, initially at least, hesitate to really do so. So Morgan begins their speech sort of impersonally and generally, describing climate collapse and class disparity in really broad general strokes that we're all familiar with. They then work, quote-unquote, up to more difficult, more specific issues. They acknowledge their own participation in the system, for example. And this progression itself makes a lot of sense to me because I have found that, ironically, in conversations, in my real life, these large-scale cataclysms are almost easier to talk about than trying to work through the ways in which one as an individual could materially do more to affect positive change. If I have a critique here, it's that there's maybe a tad too much tell and not quite enough show relative to how these problems manifest in Yatil in the second act. I think I've established by now that what happens in the play within the play is itself a commentary upon the characters and the world of the first act, and that both of those things then relate to our real world, right? So if Morgan is talking about these specific issues, then I expect them to show up and really be significant in the play within the play. In the play world, then, what I would really like to see is the climate catastrophe and class disparity on which Morgan seems to be the most focused. Don't get me wrong, these elements are present, but I think that they could feel more threatening to the reader or the viewer. We know that Carcosa fell to class conflict because the stranger told us. We know that Casilda is a ruler more concerned with her own legacy than with the needs of her people because people keep telling us. But what we don't really actually see is this class disparity in particular. It doesn't really manifest fully materially in the world of the play, at least not by my reckoning. I want to see, even if only very briefly, how Casilda's leadership style, how her tyrannical control over the government is hurting people, and how it's having deleterious effects on the environment. How ecological decline around the lake and around Yatil in particular has then exacerbated that class disparity and contributed to this cycle where, in order to try to gain more control over the situation, Casilda becomes even more despotic. Morgan's rant also serves an extremely important narrative purpose in that it serves as one of the two major justifications for the group's decision to end the world. The other one is the one that's shared by Cass and Alex. Having seen how casually and how senselessly cruel the world can be, they decide that they would rather put an end to everything rather than allow any extreme suffering to continue. But we learn something a little bit after Morgan's rant that I find really, really interesting. In their conversation, Morgan tells Hastur that they want to end the world because it's easier than trying to figure out how to fix it. I think this really complicates, and in an extremely delightful way, the rhetorical aims of the play because, despite being vocally anti-imperialist, Morgan's thinking in this moment is incredibly imperial. Ultimately, Morgan makes their decision to end the world without consulting the groups of people most affected by the colonialism, by the racism, by the ecocide that they are decrying. And though I'm certain that Morgan themselves would never frame it in this way, their decision is ultimately a patriarchal one. It's a decision that says, I can imagine no path towards resolving these problems, so I will just decide to end everything. Now, narratively, as dark as this is, I think it's absolutely fantastic. It provides just such an excellent example of how deeply ingrained in the American consciousness this sort of colonial type of thinking is. Even progressive people like Morgan struggle to imagine a world outside of or after our present state of affairs. And when they do imagine it, they imagine us getting there because some small group of people or one exceptional person chose on behalf of the vast majority of the world to burn everything down. And yet, as quote unquote, problematic as this decision is, Hastur visiting Morgan and selecting them to be the one to make the choice to end the world is also reflective of a certain uncomfortable material reality relative to our shared world. As Americans, assuming that you listening to this are an American, which I shouldn't because we have a delightfully non-American audience. Hello to all of you out there. I'm sorry about how I pronounced that French word in the first, 15 minutes of the video or something. Those of us who are American anyway, our political decisions, our votes, our protests, our doing nothing to disrupt rancidly evil systems all have outsized impacts on the rest of the world. I relate to Morgan's anxiety because this is a fact that I wrestle with daily. America is, or maybe was, the most powerful country on the planet, and it didn't even have a clear rival for the last 50 years until, recently. Speaking for myself, I feel really terrified whenever I, as an American, make a political choice. Casting a vote in a presidential election, because I know that my decision will have consequences for people, not just in my city or my state or my nation, but well beyond it. And I don't want this to be the case. I do not want people in Slovakia or Tanzania or Vietnam worried about who my president is. That should not have to be their business. But it is their business because of the kind of country that America is. And just as some people have outsized political influence at the global level, just because of the accident of their birth, I wasn't chosen to be born in America by some cosmic force because I'm uniquely qualified to make decisions about the fate of the world. And just as that is the case, Morgan happens to have more say in whether the world ends because they were the one that Hastur chose. This is descriptive of real facts about the world that are uncomfortable to think about, and I appreciate that the play draws our attention to those facts. Still, I think that one potential crack in this parallel construction lies in how the play frames the world ending. When the ritual is complete, when, the play is over and the world ends, Morgan transforms into a butterfly, a lot of shit blows up, and then the rest of our main cast is transported into what I'm calling the closure dimension, where they get to be together forever. So if the story is critical of Morgan choosing to end the world on the grounds that this is a rather undemocratic use of power that they didn't deserve to have in the first place, then what does it mean that the results of Morgan's choice are seemingly kind of okay, at least for our named characters? I do think there's actually a satisfying answer here if we shift our perception, as Hastur says, a little bit to the left. If we read Morgan not as an individual American, as I was just doing, but rather as a member of a global working class, then their despair at the state of the world becomes kind of a synecdoche for global despair the play alludes to over and over and over again, including at the very end of Morgan's transformation, where they, as Hastur, call upon the dispossessed worldwide to utter this final cry that ushers the very end of the world. Read this way, what we have is not an exceptional individual making a choice for a massively diverse group of people, but rather Morgan as a sort of narrative shorthand for an international uprising that would otherwise butt up against some of the practicalities of the stage play as a medium. You know, it would be hard to get the entire global south on one stage. I also think that this is part of why Scala chose not to assign a gender or an ethnicity to Morgan or any of the other main characters. It isn't so much that they are non-binary specifically, but rather that they could be anyone of any race or gender or ethnicity. The presentations of the various named characters during any one individual staging of the play actually has the potential to completely flip how the play is read. i.e., if we're taking this synecdoche reading, you know, where Morgan represents not just one guy, but a group of people, then the actor selected to play Morgan completely changes how the play might be interpreted. For example, Morgan makes this comment during their rant about how being working class, having to work to earn one's money, is analogous to American slavery, in that there is a threat of violence against those unable or unwilling to work. The main difference, though, according to Morgan, is that in one case, the violence is explicit and direct, and in the other, it remains mere threat until one actually ceases to labor and can no longer pay their bills. This moment reads super, super differently, depending on whether Morgan is played by a white American actor or a black American actor. And this could be even more complicated if the play is not set in America at all, which, to be fair, it is never explicitly stated to be. In other words, the stakes of the play could change in all kinds of different ways, depending on who plays who and what we take those people to represent, which I find very exciting from a rhetorical perspective. The way I see it, regardless of the specifics of any individual staging of the play, there are at least two categories into which interpretations of Morgan's character could fall. In one, the play is mostly critical of Morgan, the selfish imperialist, who claims to be on the side of the working class person, even and especially those more oppressed than they are, and yet still makes a decision for those people without ever even considering consulting them. On the other hand, and I have it on good authority that this is closer to the quote-unquote intended reading, that Morgan is more of a stand-in for sort of an international working class. That their choice to end the world is meant to imply that this is the choice that many other people in their position would have made. That this is what those people would want. In my opinion, which of these readings becomes the primary one when this eventually makes it out into the world primarily hinges on, let's say, three closely related concepts. The first one is what it means for the world to end versus be destroyed. The second one would be what we make of the closure dimension at the very end of the play, to which the named characters, except for Morgan, are all transported. And finally, whether Hastur is actually correct when they say that the world is a dream from which it is possible to wake up into perhaps a more preferable, though no more permanent, alternative existence. Let's go through these three ideas in order. The play goes to pretty great lengths to correct characters who say they want to destroy the world rather than end the world, to the point that it becomes like sort of a running gag. But what does it really mean, though, to end the world, especially when, during Morgan/Hastur's final monologue, we're talking about cities crumbling, about rotting corpses, about various other destruction-coded events and images? To me, it does seem that the world is destroyed, but I think the distinction makes sense if we consider it from Hastur's point of view. In an email, Scala confirmed to me that Hastur is not lying when they say that all time is simultaneous from their perspective. For Hastur, humans and the world that they inhabit are really just one permutation of the same substance that once comprised whatever was at the beginning of any given universe. The substance that will one day be absorbed into Earth's expanding sun. By this logic, dreams too are just rearrangements of existing stuff. Perceptions, thoughts, and fears that originate in the waking world are just reassembled in the world of sleep. And when the dream is over, it isn't really right to say that it's destroyed, but rather that a particular composition of the elements that comprised it has gone away, and that they will then be reincorporated into a new formation soon enough. If that is the case, I think that the play would have us read the closure dimension in which the final scene takes place as kind of like a staging ground in which all of the components that will go on to be incorporated and present in the next iteration of the universe are just waiting to be reassembled. To try to continue tracking elements of the story as a metaphor for like class warfare. This is sort of like the in-between period after one regime ends and before another one, whether for good or for ill, manages to consolidate power and, begin the next thing. With that in mind, I think that the final scene could benefit from a few tweaks in order to make that reading clearer. I think it could be made a bit more obvious that the characters are here forever, in one sense, yes, but in another, only until they're recompiled into basically something new. I'd like to see them maybe planning out what it is they'll become in the new world as kind of a metaphor for the working class coming together to create a new government. In the current version, when Alex says what happens now and Cam responds, this forever, everything else forever too, it draws our attention specifically to the fact that everything that we've just seen happen is still happening, which for me undermines the point of the play. Morgan and Cass and Alex all work together to end the world in order to abort suffering. But then if everything is happening, if the play draws our attention to the fact that all of that is still happening, it makes it all feel a bit pointless. I don't think that the world building needs to be fundamentally changed so that this is no longer true. Rather, I think that we need to have our attention directed away from the fact that all the suffering is still happening and instead towards how the characters might rearrange the next universe in order to hopefully make a better one. And I think that that's where the play can end. I don't want to see anything about what happens in this new universe. I want no inkling as to whether they have a good chance at making something that ultimately results in, happier sentient life, or maybe they choose to make something that has no sentient life at all. After all, Hastur did say at one point in the play that everything that becomes sentient eventually ends up destroying itself in this way, like on a societal level. So I don't know, I don't want to know. I want that to be completely open-ended, but I want to see the characters having agency in these final moments. They can't necessarily prevent retroactively all the suffering that has already occurred, but for me, this would at least close the loop on Morgan as a synecdoche for a global underclass. If Morgan ended one permutation of the world, if they sacrificed themselves in the end to do that, I would like to see their friends working towards a new one so that it doesn't feel like what Morgan did is totally in vain. Okay, man, I guess we're at the conclusion now. I didn't really write much for this section at all. I have a hard time writing conclusions because it feels like, you're taught in school to restate what you've already stated in order to help people remember your main points, I guess. But there's no way I'm restating the point of the play again because it'll have been repeated within the script necessarily at this point. And besides that, anybody who really cares will scrub back through the video and find the thing that they're interested in. Me repeating a watered down version of what I've already said is not going to help anybody. It feels a bit obsolete in this format. But yeah, wow, it really feels like we're at the end here. This was a super rewarding read. I just have to say that. I'll freely admit that there are parts of it that I haven't fully worked out. There are parts of it that I maybe misunderstood. Despite emailing Scala a bit back and forth, I did not ask them specific questions about the play, and they sent me a few bits of information that they thought I might find interesting or useful, without much prompting from me, which I appreciate. It did help me write the script. But I did not ask them to clarify specific things. So there might be things that I misunderstood, but hopefully if that's the case, that will be data for Scala as well as they continue to put the finishing touches on The King in Yellow. If after, hearing my summary and my analysis, you, the club member, have feelings or thoughts, alternative interpretations about my reading of the play, I hope that you'll let me know in the comments below. I'm really looking forward to see what people think of this one. This is going to be not just my last King in Yellow video for the foreseeable future, but my last solo video essay project for a little while. I'm undergoing some life changes right now that are going to take away some of the time that I've been dedicating to projects like this one. And so I'm really glad that, if that phase is temporarily ending, my video essay era is closing up for just a little while, then at least I got to end it with something really cool like this. So with that, I want to say thank you so much, Scala, for sending me The King in Yellow. It is really rare to work with a text that you get so much out of. I got more out of this than I got out of the original Chambers stories, TBQH. Although they're great stories too. I love them, and I wouldn't have been able to understand this play if I didn't understand them. If anything, I think that's a testament to the achievement that this play is. It really feels like we read The King in Yellow, and then we took an additional step. It feels like real progress. I hope that my commentary, my feedback, my misunderstandings are useful to you as you lock in any final edits. And I really can't wait to see this play performed on stage, hopefully sometime really soon. I would love to be there on opening night, wherever, whenever that ends up happening. Finally, whether you have been following my descent into the Yellow mythos from the beginning, whether you jumped in somewhere in the middle, or if this is your first time at club, thank you so much for being here. This wouldn't have been possible without your attendance. You make all the difference. I'm looking forward to seeing you all at our next regular meeting of the SBU English Club, but until then, I'll see you around campus.